weekly Wednesday webinar with Squibbler. Today, we're going to talk about writing about surroundings, landscapes, and environment, and how to make these more compelling and poetic. So, in this webinar, you are going to learn how to see like a writer, how to use the captivating language of place, and how to use some of Squibbler's AI tools to describe place. Just something to open up with that I thought was thought-provoking. This is from Joan Didion, an essay she wrote called Goodbye to All That. She says, a place belongs forever to whoever claims it hardest, remembers it most obsessively, wrenches it from itself, shapes it, renders it, loves it so radically that he remakes it with his own image. Landscape writing is about the natural world and our surroundings, and writing about them as more than mere backdrops. They're living, breathing elements that can transform your writing from ordinary to extraordinary. When writing about surroundings is done well, it creates an emotional depth, it can reveal more about the characters, and it can establish mood and immerses readers in worlds that they can feel, smell, and touch. So I thought we'd look at a couple of examples from professional writers that are really well done, just to kind of inspire you. And this one's from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. She says in this novel, "Do you understand this feeling? This breeze, which has traveled from the regions towards which I am advancing, gives me a foretaste of those icy climes. Inspirited by this wind of promise, my daydreams become more fervent and vivid. I try in vain to be persuaded that the pole is the sea of frost and desolation. It ever presents itself to my imagination as the region of beauty and delight. There, Margaret, the sun is forever visible, its broad disk just skirting the horizon and diffusing a perpetual splendor." This is one of those instances that you see where the landscapes and surroundings are affecting the character. Another example is from the American poet Robert Frost. He often incorporates landscape into his writing. And in this poem, he's talking about an experience as a child. "I'd like to go by climbing a birch tree and climb black branches up snow-white trunk toward heaven, till the tree could bear no more, but dipped its top and set me down. That would be good both going and coming back. One could do worse than be a swinger of birches." And in this case, just writing about these trees, these birch trees, is leading the poet to a much deeper meaning about going to heaven and coming back, the exhilaration you feel as a child. Another example from an American writer is Cormac McCarthy. He's written countless popular books that have been turned into novels. This one is from his first novel, and here he's describing Tennessee and the mountains in Tennessee, where he says that the Appalachians contort the outgoing roads to their liking. The first of these is the Red Mountain. From the crest on a clear day, you could see the cool blue line of the watershed like a distant promise. In late summer, the mountain bakes under a sky of pitiless blue. The red dust of the orchard yard road is powder from a brick kiln. You can't scoop of it in your hand. Hot winds come up the slope from the valley like a rancid breath, redolent of milkweed, hoglets, rotting vegetation. So notice that he does a lot here to develop the landscape and personify it, make it have human qualities. And that makes it very poetic as well. So one thing you want to aim for when you're writing about surroundings and environments is to observe things the way a writer should. Keep, a look at things with fresh eyes and don't just rely on the visual. Try to incorporate all five senses. So think about things like texture, sound, smell, temperature, invisible qualities that make a place unique. You're really going to have to work on training your observational skills this way, and using all five senses in your descriptions. You also want to try to aim for the specific over the general, as you see Cormac McCarthy do in that lovely description of the mountains in Tennessee. Another thing that these writers do successfully is capture the atmosphere and mood through place. These environments aren't just there as backdrops. All three of those examples from popular writers influence and shape the characters as well. Using the five senses are just as important in urban environments as well. It doesn't just have to be the outside surroundings. Think about your local bodega, for example, or maybe a dive bar. What does it smell like? What sounds distinguish this place from an upscale place? Is the bar's counter smooth or worn to the touch? We tend to rely on visual descriptions, but you can really surprise yourself by exploring with other senses. So, one thing you might try is if you're going to write a place, go to that place and experiment by closing your eyes and relying on the other four senses smell, sound, and so forth to describe the familiar setting. You might also consider making your landscape part of the character, as Cormac McCarthy did in that example, making it an active part of your narrative. The environment should influence your characters. It can reflect their internal states, as we saw in Robert Frost Birch's poem. And it can also create obstacles or opportunities that drive the story forward, depending on what your plot goals are. You might think about weather and season as storytelling tools. You can create symbolic landscapes. You might think about the environment as an antagonist that fights against your character or an ally that works with your character. We do have an additional webinar on landscape as character, and you can find this webinar on our Discord server in the resources library if you're interested in it. One thing to think about when you're writing about place and the language of place is to aim for writings and descriptions that sing. You're trying to aim for the poetic. You want to think about the rhythm of the words you're using, your word choice. Think about using metaphors and poetry hidden in seemingly ordinary landscapes that can elevate your descriptions. So, some tips for you is to choose active, specific verbs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and show you some examples in a moment. Think about using fresh metaphors and similes. You can get our AI to do that for you as well by using the describe function and asking it to create some metaphors. You can think about balancing the beauty of the landscape you're writing about, or conversely, the harshness or ugliness with authenticity. You do want to make sure you're avoiding cliches and things that are overly, descriptive, too many adjectives. That's going to bog down your writing. So there is a balance here that you're striking for. One thing that can really help in this instance is reading poetry. Poets often write about landscapes. They use metaphors and really beautiful language to describe place. And this can help you in writing your prose as well. One thing to think about is your structure and pacing. Think about when to expand your descriptions and when to condense them. Not every landscape needs a full paragraph, as we saw in Cormac McCarthy's example. So you can consider a couple things. Maybe you're opening a chapter with an idea about the landscape or environment. You might weave parts of a description into action that you're writing. You want to think about when less may be more in certain circumstances. If it's really wearing down your reader or if it seems boring, it's a good idea to pare it down. And think about creating rhythm with description and also dialogue between characters. So some techniques that you can experiment with are color and light. Think about how changing light transforms a landscape. Things like the golden hours that you see at sunrise or sunset, things like storms and shadows. These are all things that you can write about and extend to the page. Another thing is to think about experimenting with movement and sound. You can bring static scenes, things that are just stiff and still, to life with things like wind, the sounds of wind, the sounds of water, rustling leaves, all of these things, these motions of nature that we can listen to. Another technique to experiment is with scale and perspective. Using vast landscapes to evoke wonder in your characters or intimate details to create connections can also really elevate your writing as well. You might also want to experiment with seasonal shifts, harnessing the emotional power of seasons and how they can mirror the human experience. And one really famous example is from Shakespeare's Sonnet 73. And notice how he combines or connects the landscape with the person speaking, the speaker of the poem. That time of year thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold. Bare ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang, in me thou seest the twilight of such a day, as after sunset fadeth in the west. It's just beautiful. You can also experiment with times of day. Think about the distinct personalities of dawn and noon and dusk and midnight. We all seem to have a preference for one time or another, and you can experiment with that and the connection to your protagonist, your antagonist as well. Think about emotional geography too, creating landscapes that reflect and amplify your characters' inner worlds. These can be urban, they can be rural, they can be mountains, deserts, whatever it is that you want to connect to your characters. So, here are some more specific tips for success, things to do and things to avoid. So, when you're writing about place, use specific place names and terms. So, generic words like tree or mountain are hazy and pretty boring. So, think about the species, the geological formations, or local terminology in those places you're writing about. So, an example of what not to do: trees line the water. That's very generic. Your readers are going to skip over that. It doesn't really enhance your writing. Or maybe we walked through the bushes. Think about the rewrite here. The cottonwoods whispered along the creek bed, or we climbed through scrub oak and juniper. There we get a more evocative image of what is going on in this writing and about the landscape. You want to anchor your descriptions in action as well. Weave your landscape details into what your characters are doing rather than stopping for a narrative descriptive paragraph. So, an example would be she stumbled over exposed roots, their gnarled fingers catching at her ankles as the fog thickened between the pines. Here you have these roots being personified as having gnarled fingers catching at her ankles. And then we have this really beautiful image of the fog getting thicker between the trees as well. And all of this sets a tone and a mood and an atmosphere here. It seems more dangerous than if we just said she tripped in the woods. One thing to do as well is rather than cataloging your descriptions as sight, smell, taste, sound, and touch, think about using one sense to dominate and then add one or two others that you can support. So this can create some focus and prevent sensory overload. And one way to really handle this is think, what would my character that I'm writing about notice first in this environment? Or if you're writing a memoir, you might think about things that you recollect in your memoir about places you're writing about and what was most dominant to you in those scenes. Maybe it was the smell of your grandmother's cooking. Maybe it was the sound of woodworking from your father's studio. So these are just things that you can add as well. One tip that's really important is to avoid the to be verbs in your descriptions: am, was, were, be, being, been. So instead of writing things like the wind was strong on the mesa or the rain was heavy on the roof, try to give agency to your landscape elements by using strong active verbs. So the revision of this is much stronger. The wind scraped across the mesa. Rain hammered the tin roof. All of these active verbs make your writing much more evocative and engaging. Another tip for success is thinking about that rule of three. Humans tend to like patterns, and especially those in three, in writing and in jokes. So three specific details can create a complete picture without overwhelming your readers. More than five becomes a laundry list, so you want to avoid too many details. So an example here is the desert offered nothing but scorched earth, skeletal saguaros, and the heat that shimmered like water. It's a very satisfying sentence because it does use this rule of three. Another way to build strong landscape descriptions is by infusing character in it. Filter the landscape through a character's perspective. What does your character notice? And what they notice may reveal something about their emotional state, their background, their concerns. For example, if you have a botanist, a real estate developer, and a lost child, those three are going to view the same forest very differently. And you may even try an exercise like this where you write the same scenes from three different points of view. Another thing to look for is unexpected comparisons. These will move your writings from cliche to poetic. So think about fresh metaphors and similes that surprise readers and can create beautiful and memorable images. Avoid cliches like white as snow or quiet as a mouse. Those are overdone. They're not adding anything new to your work. So something like the lake lay flat as hammered steel, or morning mist clung to the valley like breath on a mirror is much more unique. It's much more engaging as well. Another thing to think about is changing the rhythm of your sentences, varying your sentence structure and the rhythm. Match your sentence structure to your landscape. Short sentences create tension and starkness, but longer flowing sentences can really be good for beautiful, peaceful, and overwhelming landscapes. So, an example here about a desert can use those shorter sentences effectively. The sun beat down, no shade, no water, only cracked earth stretching to the horizon. You kind of get this tone of helplessness in those short sentences. Compare that with this description of the forest. The forest unfolded in layers of green, ferns giving way to moss covered logs, saplings reaching toward the canopy where light filtered through in golden columns. So, in both cases, the landscape writing is reflecting those landscapes. Another thing we talked about earlier was showing scale through contrast, but we want to take an example of how this is going to work. You can help your readers understand the size of something by juxtaposing something small and large rather than using measurements, which are kind of dull. So, an example here would be a sparrow perched on the canyon rim, dwarfed by the walls that plunged 1,000 feet to the thread of the river below. So, by comparing this tiny little bird perched on the edge, we get a really nice image of what that looks like and how deep this canyon actually is. Another thing to consider is negative space, which we usually think about in design, leaving white space, but you can also use this in your writing. What's absent from a place, from a landscape, can be as powerful as what you're describing that's present. So things like silence, emptiness, lack of expected elements can create atmosphere as well. So some examples here could be no bird song, the beach stretched empty, not even wind disturbed the stillness. So all of these negative spaces help to build some mystery in the writing. Another thing to think about is movement. Try to capture movement and change. Static descriptions are lifeless. They don't really help your writing. They slow it down. So think about things like clouds moving, light shifting, water flowing, wind that's bending grass. Landscapes are never still. They're constantly moving. So an example here could be shadows crawled across the hillside as the sun dropped toward the ridge. You have a nice balance in that sentence as well. And it's going to convey the passage of time, but it also creates visual interest for your readers. This is a really important one, showing and not telling. We do have an entire webinar on this concept between the difference of showing what you're writing about versus telling. So if you want to look for that webinar, it's in the resources library on our Discord server. And of course, we also have this function in Scribbler's AI. If you feel like you're explaining too much, you can use the rewrite function to eliminate this showing and not telling. So instead of saying something like the landscape felt lonely and desolate, there's nothing wrong with that sentence. You know, it is technically grammatically correct, but it is telling. We're talking about how that landscape feels. Consider how this sounds so much better with the rewrite. The only sound was wind rattling the loose shutter of the abandoned farmhouse. We understand this is a desolate landscape, but it's using much more evocative language. You can also use weather as a pacing tool. Dramatic weather can accelerate tension. Calm weather can slow down the pace. Using weather changes to signal shifts in your narrative can be useful as well. So another tip that you want to follow is to avoid the generic. Try to edit out generic adjectives like pretty, nice, lovely, beautiful. These tell rather than show. So you want to replace them with specific visual details. Don't get overly focused on this as you're writing your draft, but when you go back in and edit, this is a good place to edit for getting rid of some of these generic terms. So an example here, the garden was beautiful. Again, there's nothing technically wrong with that sentence. It's just kind of dull, and it doesn't really give your reader any idea of what the garden actually looks like. So consider this with the revision. Roses climbed a stone wall, their petals dropping pink confetti on the flagstone path. Now we have an idea of how this landscape actually looks and how beautiful it actually is. Your last tip for success, of course, is edit. Emotionally significant locations deserve a fuller description. In other words, if your landscape is important, then you want to make sure that you are giving it the attention that it's due in your writing. If it's just a transitional space, it's not that important to your plot or character, summarize it in one line. So the rule of thumb here is if the place matters to plot or character develop, expand it. If it's just getting characters from A to B, compress it. And of course, you can use the expand function with Scribbler's AI to work on this. Some mistakes to avoid when you're writing about landscapes and surroundings is make sure that you're not creating a laundry list. Cataloging every element visible in the scene is not necessarily useful. Your reader may skip over it if it's just not helping move the plot forward, if it's not adding to your character development. Avoid trying to write what's known as the travel brochure. You don't want to write these over beautifying descriptions of everything with generic praise either. Avoid weather reports, mechanical recitations of conditions without atmosphere. If you're describing the weather, it should be building the atmosphere of your story. It should affect your characters and so forth. Another thing that's really important to avoid is the research dump. If you've done a lot of research on a location, sometimes trying to show off the knowledge that you've gained doesn't really serve your story well. So this is where you have to be pretty brutal in your editing stage. You also want to avoid generic placeholders. Again, avoid using vague terms like pretty or beautiful that could describe anywhere. What makes this place unique? How can you describe it in unique ways? Try to avoid the static snapshot as well, freezing a scene with no movement or change. Environments and places are constantly moving, whether they're a bodega, whether they're a desert. There's always action. Try to avoid as well the adjective avalanche. You don't want to just keep piling modifiers and adjectives instead of choosing precise nouns and verbs. And finally, try to avoid the disembodied description. You don't want to just have landscape details that float free from your character perspective or to greater meaning in the story that you're writing. So some ways to use Scribbler's AI. The describe function is really useful because you can highlight paragraphs you already have and then have the AI experiment with rewriting it with the other senses. Instead of just looking at sight, you can use sound, smell, taste, touch. Describe can also help you create fresh metaphors for describing landscape. You can also use the rewrite function and ask the AI to rewrite those passages that you're writing about to be more poetic or evocative. So there are some books and some poets that you can read that are really, really strong with landscape writing. Some of those, if you're writing nonfiction for nature writing, Annie Dillard and Barry Lopez and Robert Macfarlane are very strong. For fiction, taking a look at Cormac McCarthy, Willa Cather, and Toni Morrison are really helpful. Poetry, poets like Mary Oliver, Wendell Berry, Joe Harjo, and Robert Frost are very, very good nature writers. And for environment literature, Rachel Carson and Terry Tempest Williams are also good resources to check out. If you want to put into practice what you've learned in this webinar, here are some exercises. You can freeze the screen, of course, when it's on YouTube, and maybe pick about a place that you want to write about. Set your timer or your phone timer for 10 minutes and describe a place using only non-visual senses, and then layer in what you see using the other 4 senses. Describe the same landscape from exercise 1 from the perspective of different characters with different emotional states and see how everything is going to change. Somebody who's frightened of water is going to respond to it is going to respond to it differently from someone who is on the water all the time, who might be a marine biologist and so forth. You might also think about going from micro to macro descriptions. Practice zooming in from a tiny detail, something like a dewdrop, a petal, the interior of a flower, to a sweeping vista, and that's going to create a cinematic movement in your prose as well. So we do have some exclusive help for you on Discord that goes along with this webinar. When we upload this to Discord, we'll have a free packet for you to help you plan for writing about environments and landscapes. We'll also have a sensory word bank for you that's divided by environment type. In other words, if it's desert, if it's urban, if it's a rainforest, we have a lot of words and verbs that are be helpful to you depending on the environment you're writing about. So in this webinar, we did review how to see like a writer, We looked at how to use captivating language of place and some tips for writing about surroundings, environments, and places. And we looked at how you can use some of Scribbler's AI tools to describe place or revise your work for more effective descriptions of landscapes and surroundings. Thank you for joining me for this webinar on landscape writing. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or you want to discuss, we can continue the conversation on our Discord server, and the materials will be uploaded there for you as well in our resource library. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.